It was a cold December night, just a week before Christmas, when Peter and his dad arrived at their summer house in the Hamptons. The house was big and quiet, sitting at the end of a lonely road. It had been empty for months, and most of the neighbors had already left for the winter, so the whole area felt empty and a little spooky. Peter's mom and sister weren't with them, yet caused they would come later. For now, it was just Peter and his dad. His dad had retired recently and wanted to get the house ready for Christmas early. Peter didn't mind coming along. He was glad to take a break from school and enjoy the peace and quiet. The night was freezing, and the wind howled outside as the house slowly warmed up. The heater buzzed to life, and the water pipes made funny noises, like they were waking up from a long nap. Peter went to his room, set up his PS3, and got lost in his video games. Time flew by, and he didn't even notice that snow had started to fall outside. Before long, the snow turned into a heavy storm that would last for days. The next morning, Peter woke up late and wandered into the kitchen, still sleepy from staying up too long playing games. His dad was standing by the window, staring outside with a confused look on his face. "Did you make a snowman?" his dad asked, sounding unsure, like he was trying to solve a mystery. Peter rubbed his eyes and looked at his dad. "What are you talking about?" he replied, totally confused. Peter's dad pointed to the backyard. Out in the snow, there was a snowman. It was about 2 feet tall, made from freshly packed snow. Its arms were 2 crooked branches sticking up in the air, and its face had a strange, almost creepy smile. Peter shivered. He didn't make it. His dad, always the logical one, said it must be a prank from the neighbor's kids. But Peter couldn't shake the feeling that something about it was off. That night, the snowstorm got worse. The wind howled and slammed against the windows. Peter, feeling uneasy, tried to sleep, but he couldn't shake the strange feeling in his chest. Suddenly, he heard a loud thump against the window. He froze, his heart racing. Was it just a branch? Or maybe the wind? Then another thump came, followed by a scratching noise. Peter trembled. He pulled the blanket over his head, hoping the noises would go away. But after a while, curiosity got the better of him. He peeked out from under the blanket and slowly walked to the window. What he saw made him gasp. Another snowman was standing right outside the glass. Its face looked angry with wide, scary eyes and a frown. It didn't look like a regular snowman. It looked almost alive. Peter screamed, his voice breaking the silence of the house. He ran as fast as he could to his dad's room, his heart pounding. Soon after, his dad woke up and quickly came to check. When he saw Peter's scared face, he didn't ask questions. He grabbed his coat and looked serious. "I'll talk to the neighbors tomorrow," he said firmly. His voice was calm, but Peter could tell he was worried. This has to stop. At that moment, Peter was scared and couldn't stop thinking about the snowman. That night, he asked to sleep in his sister's room. Even though he was safe inside, his mind kept wondering, who made that creepy snowman, and why? The next morning, Peter's dad went to talk to the neighbors. But when he got there, the house was silent. Usually there were kids playing and cars parked outside, but now the driveway was empty. His dad knocked on the door, but no one answered. It was strange, like the whole neighborhood had disappeared. Peter felt uneasy, but his dad didn't say much and walked back home. Days went by and nothing strange happened. Peter started to relax, but deep down he still felt like something was watching him. Then, on Christmas Eve, the house was full of life. Peter's mom, sister, and grandparents had arrived, and the family gathered for dinner. The fire crackled in the fireplace, and everyone laughed and talked, making the house feel warm and cheerful. For a while, Peter forgot about the snowman. Suddenly, a loud knock broke the happy atmosphere. Everyone went quiet. It wasn't the usual ding of the doorbell. The knock was sharp and firm, almost like it was demanding attention. Peter's stomach turned. The knock came again, and then a voice called out from the other side of the door. It was low and shaky. "Please let me in. I need help." Peter's dad stood up and walked to the door. He sounded calm, but Peter could tell he was being careful. "Who's there?" his dad asked. The voice answered softly but clearly. "I have no one to spend Christmas with. Please help me." Then, a cold feeling filled the room, making everyone quiet. The family looked at each other, confused and scared. Nobody was supposed to visit, and there weren't any neighbors nearby. Peter's dad spoke loudly. "Go away, or I'll call the police." For a moment, everything was silent. Then the voice came back, but it sounded farther away. "Okay, I'll leave. Please don't call the police." The voice was soft, almost like it was disappearing into the night. Peter's dad didn't open the door. Instead, he locked it tightly and stepped back, his face pale. The scary feeling returned, and the family sat there, unsure of what to think. The strange things that had been happening the past few days felt even worse now. The next morning, on Christmas, Peter was the first one to see it. There was a piece of paper taped to the front door. His hands shook as he unfolded the note. The handwriting was messy, and the words said, "I just wanted to have a little fun. I built the snowman for the boy in the house. I don't have anyone to spend the holiday with. Hurt, in one way or another. Please don't hate me." Peter's heart raced. Whoever left the note was the same person who built those creepy snowmen. It wasn't a prank. This person seemed sad, lonely, and maybe even a little dangerous. The twisted snowmen, the knocks on the door, and now this note, all of it pointed to one thing. Whoever was behind this was desperate and not thinking clearly. Peter realized this wasn't over. Whatever was happening wasn't finished yet, and that was the scariest part of all. It was Christmas Eve, 2016. Andrew was 21 years old, and he and his family were celebrating the holidays at his Uncle Joshua's house in Miami. The weather was warm, totally different from the snowy Christmases Andrew was used to back home in Connecticut. Miami felt strange for Christmas, but it had its own fun vibe. Andrew and his 18-year-old brother, Nico, were excited to check out some Christmas-themed parties at the clubs. They thought it would be the perfect way to enjoy the night. The evening started with high hopes. They arrived at a fancy club in Miami Beach, decorated with shiny Christmas lights. Everyone in line was wearing Santa hats, and the place felt festive. But when they got to the bouncer, things went downhill. The bouncer wanted $100 just to get in, and when Nico showed his fake ID, the bouncer caught him right away. Embarrassed, the brothers had to leave. Not ready to give up, they found another bar nearby, hosting a similar party. This time, they got in easily. Inside, it was packed with people wearing Santa hats, music blasting, and everyone laughing and having fun. At first, it seemed like the night was back on track. But as the night went on, Andrew noticed something strange. Nico was talking to an older woman, probably in her 40s, who seemed way too interested in him. Andrew overheard bits of their conversation. The woman told Nico she liked younger guys with Hispanic accents. Her words made Andrew feel uncomfortable. It didn't seem right, but Nico was enjoying the attention and didn't notice anything odd. At that time, the woman was wearing a blue Santa hat and a flashy Christmas sweater. She kept talking to Nico and paying him way too much attention. Andrew, being the protective older brother, stayed nearby but didn't interrupt. Instead, he started chatting with other people, keeping an eye on Nico. After a while, Nico tapped Andrew on the shoulder and whispered, "I'm leaving with her." Andrew's stomach felt weird, but he didn't want to ruin the night. "All right," he said, forcing a smile. "Have fun." There, he watched Nico leave, feeling unsure about it, but deciding not to overthink. Andrew stayed at the bar for a little while longer and then called an Uber to head back. He figured Nico would be fine, cause it was just one night, and they were both out celebrating. But then Andrew's phone rang. It was Nico. At first, the call sounded like static, as if it was a pocket dial. Then Andrew heard a deep, angry male voice in the background. Another man started yelling loudly, but Andrew couldn't make out what they were saying. "Nico," Andrew called out, his voice shaky. "Nico, is that you?" But before he could hear anything more, the call ended. Andrew's heart raced. Something was wrong. He called Nico back over and over, but there was no answer. Finally, someone picked up, but it wasn't Nico. It was a man with a deep, cold voice. "I found this phone on the sidewalk," the man said. His voice sounded strange, almost scary. That moment, Andrew's heart raced as he demanded to know who the man was and where Nico was. The man didn't give clear answers, and the phone line kept cutting in and out. Then, Andrew heard screaming. It was Nico. His voice was filled with fear. "Help! Andrew, help!" Nico yelled. Before Andrew could say anything, the call ended again. Andrew panicked. He shouted at the Uber driver to stop the car and started calling everyone he could think of. But no one answered. The fear in his chest grew bigger and bigger. He turned to the Uber driver, speaking so fast he could barely get the words out. "You need to call the police," the driver said, trying to stay calm, though he looked worried too. Andrew quickly called the police and explained everything. Soon, the officers arrived at his uncle's house. Andrew woke up his family and told them what had happened. His dad, Andrew, and the police all rushed to the bar where Nico had been earlier. Just as they arrived, Andrew's phone rang again. This time, it was Nico. "Andrew," Nico said, his voice shaky and out of breath. "I was kidnapped. I barely escaped. I'm using a stranger's phone." Andrew felt a mix of relief and fear. He told his dad what Nico said, and they followed Nico's directions to a rough part of North Miami. When they found Nico, Andrew's heart sank. Nico looked like he had been through a nightmare. His face was bruised and bloody, with 2 black eyes. His clothes were ripped, and all his stuff like wallet, phone, and keys was gone. It was clear Nico had been hurt badly and had barely made it out. Then, Nico tried to explain what happened, taking deep breaths as he spoke. After leaving the bar with the woman, he thought he was getting into an Uber, but it wasn't. The car drove into a dark alley, and as soon as Nico got inside, 2 men attacked him. They held him down and threatened him, saying they would hurt him if he made a sound. One of them even used Nico's phone to call Andrew, making things even scarier. The car kept driving for what felt like forever. Nico was terrified. When the car finally stopped, the men let go of him for a moment. That's when Nico saw his chance. He jumped out of the car and ran as fast as he could. The car sped away, leaving him alone in the darkness. "I thought they were going to kill me," Nico said, his voice shaking. "I thought they'd leave me somewhere, and I'd never get home." The police looked into what happened, but they couldn't find the woman from the club. She had disappeared, and the men didn't wear masks, which made it even more confusing. Nico was sure that if he hadn't run, the men would have done something terrible to him. It was a nightmare that ruined Christmas, but the family was just glad Nico was alive. That night, as the family tried to calm down and rest, something even scarier happened. Andrew woke up to the sound of Nico screaming. "She's in the house!" Nico yelled, his voice filled with panic. Andrew rushed to Nico's room and shook him awake. Nico's face was pale, and his eyes were wide with fear, like he'd seen something terrible. "She's here. The woman. She's in the house," Nico said, his voice trembling. He could barely get the words out. Andrew felt a shiver run through him as Nico's words sank in. The same woman, the same strange smile, the same feeling of fear that had haunted them all night. It wasn't over. Something was still out there, hiding in the shadows of their Christmas nightmare. Andrew went back to his bed, but couldn't sleep. He kept his eyes wide open, listening carefully for any noise in the dark. Nico's screams had broken the silence, and now the house felt heavy with fear. Was the woman really there? Would she come back? Or was something even scarier waiting for them? Andrew didn't close his eyes that night, too afraid of what might happen if he did. A few years ago, Turner and his brother George bought a small house together. It wasn't fancy, but it was their first home, and they decided to make it special by hosting Christmas there. They invited their family for a cozy celebration. At that time, their parents, aunt and uncle, cousin, and their sister with her husband and 2 kids come. Their sister came early to help cook and brought her dog, Mika, along. Since she lived 2 hours away, she and her family planned to stay the night, while the rest of the family would go home after dinner. The evening was filled with laughter, good food, and Christmas cheer. At one point, someone brought up some scary news about recent murders discovered in the woods nearby. Turner's mom and sister quickly changed the subject to keep things happy, but the thought stayed in Turner's mind. After dinner, everyone moved to the living room to watch a Christmas movie, chatting and enjoying some wine. Slowly, people started leaving, and by the end of the night, only Turner, George, their sister, her family, and Turner's girlfriend were left. The kids went to bed early while the adults stayed up talking. Turner's girlfriend came over around 10 p.m. to join them and spend the night. When everyone finally went to bed, the house was quiet. But around 2 a.m., Turner was woken up by his girlfriend shaking him. "Listen," she whispered. Turner sat up, his heart racing. He listened carefully and heard Mika, the dog, growling in the hallway. It wasn't like Mika to act this way, so Turner got up to see what was going on. In the hallway, he noticed the back door was wide open and cold air was rushing in. Mika was standing there, staring into the dark, her growl low and steady. Turner felt a chill run through him. He walked to the door, trying to figure out if someone had broken in or if something was outside. Then he heard a voice calling from the woods. It was George's voice. At first, Turner felt relieved, thinking George might be in trouble and needed help. He rushed back to his room, told his girlfriend, and quickly put on his shoes and coat. Grabbing a flashlight, he stepped outside into the cold night. A thin layer of snow covered the ground, and right there, leading from the back door, were footprints heading into the woods. Turner's heart started beating faster. "George," he called out, his voice echoing in the night. To his surprise, he heard George's voice answer, faint and far away, coming from deep in the woods. Turner followed the trail of footprints, calling for his brother. But as he went deeper into the forest, the footprints began to fade, and soon they were gone. Turner stopped, feeling uneasy. He called George's phone, but there was no answer. The woods were quiet, too quiet. There was no wind, no animals, not even the sound of leaves moving. Suddenly, Turner's phone rang. He jumped, his heart pounding, and answered quickly. It was his girlfriend. "Turner," she said, sounding confused. "George is in his room." Turner froze. His flashlight shook in his hand. How could George be in his room? He had just heard George's voice out here, calling to him from the woods. It didn't make sense. "Check the pull-out couches," Turner said, his voice shaky. After a pause, his girlfriend came back. "Everyone is here. They're all inside." A chill ran down Turner's spine. The woods suddenly felt different, like something was watching him. He wasn't alone anymore. Panic surged through him, and he turned and ran, the trees rushing past him as he sprinted toward the lights of the house. When Turner burst through the back door, he slammed it shut and locked it. Everyone was awake now, their faces pale as he told them about the growling dog, the open door, the footprints in the snow, and the voice calling his name from the woods. The house fell silent as the weight of his story sank in. Something strange and terrifying had happened that night. Then, they spent about half an hour trying to decide if they should call the police. In the end, they did. A police officer came to their house, asked some questions, and took their statements. He wanted to know if anything had been stolen or if they had any enemies. The officer didn't seem too worried and told them to call again if something else happened. After that, he left and everything went quiet. But Turner couldn't stop thinking about it. He had heard George's voice in the woods, even though George had been inside the house the whole time. Was it a prank? Was his mind playing tricks on him? Or was it something more terrifying? They thought about the news of the recent murders nearby, but nothing seemed to make sense. The night ended without any more strange events, but the creepy feeling didn't go away. From that night on, Turner couldn't bring himself to go near the woods after dark. It felt like something was still out there, waiting. The mystery was never solved. Whoever or whatever had been calling Turner's name that night was still out there. And that thought stayed with him, filling him with fear every time he looked at the dark, quiet woods. The story ends.